over to yourself.
Right. Welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. My name is Councillor Henriksson and I'll be chairing the meeting today. Councillors Bowes and Thompson are also in attendance and will be participating. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. You are also reminded to note that we may have members of the public or press observing today's proceeding. Can I ask those who are observing today's meeting to keep their microphones and cameras switched off throughout? As a local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the meeting during consideration of the review, and they should leave their cameras switched on throughout, but mute their microphone when not speaking. This meeting has been convened in response to the request of a review of the decision taken by the appointed officer under the council scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Mr. Mark Mason, the assistant clerk, to outline the procedures to be followed in the conduct of these reviews.
Thank you. Members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with a local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by local review bodies should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mason. Turning to consideration of the review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the erection of a replacement dwelling house at 12 Kirk Crescent South, Aberdeen, planning reference 221154/DPP. We will now hear the planning advisor in attendance, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I will point out that Ms. Green attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she has not been involved in the early consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will not, however, be asked to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Over to you, Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I'll just share my screen. Sharing the wrong screen. You'll be able to see that now, I think.
Yes, we can. It's very.
Yeah. Okay, so the review is into a request against the refusal of the application under delegated powers, and that was for the erection of a replacement dwelling house at 12 Kirk Crescent South. The review was submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. And the applicant has indicated on the notice of review that there were no new matters that had been raised in the review submissions. In terms of procedure by which the review would be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that there should be a site visit to inspect the site rather than proceeding on the basis of the information submitted. And the applicant's agent presents the case that members would appreciate the extent to which the house would be in keeping with the established pattern of development in the area. So I will continue and provide some background information on the case before handing back for a decision on how to proceed. I'll just move on to the location plan. See the house there. So it backs southeast, and the ground generally falls from the northwest towards North Deeside Road. Just looking on the other map, North Deeside Road and the application premises there, and then continues to fall towards the south and the river. That's just the aerial photograph showing the house there, fronting onto Kirk Crescent South. And then 3D image there with the house just indicated with the red marker. That's the front elevation onto Kirk Crescent South. So the proposal is for the replacement of that house with a 4-bed house. And that's the 3D image to the rear. And then a street view there. This is the application house. I can go back later on and look from the other side as well. So this is the existing site plan and the proposed site plan on the right there. So this element of the house would have a first floor level as well. And this would be a single story element to the rear. And that's just showing the existing house and then the edge of the outlines of the two neighbouring houses. So moving on to the elevations. These two are shown at similar scale. It's done by hand, so it's not absolutely accurate, but I've put the scale there. So the proposed front elevation on the right there, facing onto the street and the existing house. So the house would measure a maximum of 7.3 metres in height, 19.5 metres in depth, and 13.8 in width. Would have an integral garage, as you can see, and the double gable feature to the front elevation. In terms of materials, they're noted there on the drawing. So the walls would be in a smooth white render with black timber cladding, natural stone cladding within this central panel, black timber windows and rainwater goods, black UVC, and also copper to the roof. So this is showing the west elevation as proposed on the right there and as existing on the left. You can just see the the double-storey element and then the single storey to the rear. And then this is the rear elevation to the south. Swapped them over and got the proposed on the left here and the existing. And the east elevation and the proposed elevation just here. And this is Kirk Crescent South to the front here. And then there's a couple of images that have been provided within the application. Front elevation to Kirk Crescent South and the rear. Turning to the plans, this proposed plan here, and this is the front of the house and the existing house on the left. And then the first floor level to the proposed house. So turning to the reasons for refusal, which are stated in full in the report of handling, which is in the agenda. The key points are that the proposal would represent an overdevelopment of the site, and that's in terms of its footprint and the massing of the building, that it would have an impact on the residential amenity of the neighbours, that the elevational design would be inconsistent with the character of the surrounding area, and in particular that it would have the appearance of a two-storey building with vertical emphasis on the front elevation due to the twin gables, that the eaves and ridge height would be uncharacteristic of the surrounding area, and that it would therefore be contrary to policy D1 on design, H1 on residential areas, the subdivision of curtilages. So the applicant's case includes the following points. First, that the proposal would be in keeping with the area, which includes houses of 2 stories with comparable ridge heights, larger footprints and of similar design. That the proposal covers less of the site than extensions that could be permitted under permitted development rights, so built without planning permission. That the proposal results in less overlooking than there would be if a dormer was built under permitted development rights, and it would have similar overlooking. There would be similar overlooking from a new house for 4 Kirk Crescent South. That's one of the applications that's been listed by the applicant in their statement, which I'll come to in a moment. They also make the point that it would be of similar size and orientation to the neighbours, so it's not unacceptable in respect of overshadowing impact on the neighbours, and overall that it complies with policies including on design, residential areas and amenity. Further, they confirm that the report of handling considers acceptable the front building line, the length of the garden, the proposed materials and the contemporary design. Also the parking, natural history impacts, that's in terms of whether the house is used as a bat roost. And there was a study submitted which showed that that was unlikely to be the case. Also acceptable in terms of waste provision and energy and water efficiency. Just continuing the applicant's case, there are photographs showing the view towards the objector's house, and that the application is supported by the material considerations in the form of previous approvals in the area, including those cases listed. I suppose this one is the closest, 15 Kurt Crescent South. And the applicant has also submitted photographs of those cases, which are in the agenda. So in terms of consultations, there were no objections from the roads team. From the waste team, there was information provided on the waste facilities, and there was no objection. Also no comments from the Cults, Bealdside and Mill Timber Community Council. There was one representation of an objection, which I alluded to earlier. That was from a house to the southeast, and it was regarding overlooking from the rear windows to the objector's house and garden. So I'll now hand back to you, convener, for a decision on the request for a site visit. Just stop sharing.
Thank you, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Councillor Bowes, could you please state if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any other further procedures are required, please state for the minute the reason why.
Thanks, convener. I'm very happy that I have sufficient information to make a decision today.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes. Councillor Thompson, could you please state if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any further procedures are required, please state for the reason why.
Thank you, convener. I can confirm that I also think we have sufficient information to come to decision today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I, in agreement with Councillor Bowes and Thompson, agree that we have sufficient information to take a decision and that no other procedures are required. As members feel they have sufficient information, we will now hear from Ms. Green on the relevant policies and considerations for this review. Back to you, Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I'll just share my screen again. Okay, moving on to the relevant policies and considerations. Get the slides to move on. Okay, in terms of development plan considerations, the proposed plan has not yet been adopted, so the 2017 local development plan remains extant, and both sets of policies are relevant considerations. The National Planning Framework 4 is adopted and is part of the development plan as well. So the site is zoned within policy H1 residential area. I've just listed here the policies that are considered relevant from the two plans, the adopted plan on the left and the proposed plan on the right. And I've highlighted the ones that were used as reasons for refusal by the case officer. So I'll just really run through those. In terms of the other policies, the report of handling did consider that the proposal didn't contravene those policies, and that was in respect of parking being acceptable, the BAT survey in terms of natural heritage, refuse provision in terms of waste management, and low and zero carbon and water efficiency. So the other policies which were used as reasons for refusal, I'll move on to. So as I mentioned, the proposal lies within an area zoned under policy H1 residential areas, and this policy states that proposals for new development will be approved in principle if they do not constitute overdevelopment, and secondly, don't have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area. In terms of the next criteria 3, there isn't a loss of open space as a result. And criteria 4, there are relevant supplementary guidances, most notably the supplementary guidance on the subdivision of residential curtilages, which I'll move on to in a moment. So the key points from the residential policy are in terms of whether this is overdevelopment of the site and whether it has an impact on character and amenity of the surrounding area. And these are kind of picked up on in the supplementary guidance. Just move on to. So in terms of the status of the supplementary guidance, this is part of the adopted local development plan. So at present, this is still a material consideration in relation to that plan. So the first criteria is relating to site coverage. And as a general rule, no more than 1/3 of the site should be covered, and that should reflect the general density of the area. Scale and massing should complement surrounding properties. New dwellings should respect the established pattern of development formed by the relationship between buildings and their gardens. Proposals shouldn't project forward of the general building line. The distance between gables of proposed and existing properties should reflect the street. Ridges and wall heads of new dwellings should not be any higher than the ridges and wall heads of adjoining dwellings. In terms of privacy, there should be an 18-metre separation between windows. That's a guideline. And in terms of amenity, this sort of echoes what's also in policy D2 in the proposed plan. And in terms of this proposal, it really looks at the impact on privacy, overlooking, daylighting and sunlighting, the impact on neighbouring properties. Policy D1, in terms of design, all development must ensure high standards of design. And in assessing design, it's important to take into account the context. And this policy recognises that not all development will be of a scale that makes a significant placemaking impact, but it recognises that good design and detail adds to the attractiveness of the built environment. And it includes the 6 qualities that you'll be familiar with from other LRBs. So overall, to evaluate the application primacy of the development plan, Planning Act requires that all applications are determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And it requires careful assessment of each application treated on its merits. Finally, in terms of the basis for the decision, the site zoned within the residential area under policy H1. So how would the proposal affect the design, character and amenity of the area as set out in the policies that I've mentioned in the supplementary guidance? Would the proposal result in overdevelopment? And does the proposal comply with the development plan when considered as a whole, or are there other material considerations which weigh for or against the proposal? And are they of sufficient weight to overcome any conflict with the development plan? Thank you. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Do members have any questions, Ms. Green? No, I have one. Looking at the plans, the ridge line of the roof appears to be quite substantially higher than the surrounding buildings. I think I take it that's what's referred to in the policies with regard to the impact within the general area. Is that the case?
Yes, that's part of what's referred to as the impact on the surrounding area. Yep.
further to, well, I have a few questions, so I'll just keep going if anyone else has any more. There's mention in the report of other buildings within the street. Would they be a sort of a material consideration that they've been approved in the past, or would they or would be just taking this planning application on its own merits?
They are a material consideration whilst still taking this application on its own merits, because every site is different, even if those differences are quite slight. It's really just for you to decide in the, you know, whilst being consistent and looking at the site on its particular merits, taking into account those other proposals which are material.
Yeah, would it be possible to have a look on Google Street View along the street just to make a comparison of these
Yeah.
compared to?
Right, so that's the application house. Let me just shut down my other screen. Right. That's the application house. Quite slow by using it with the screen sharing. This is moving along the street towards the sort of west. This is one of the properties referred to by the applicant. Is there any? No.
Yeah, with that one, the roof line appears to be very similar to the buildings on the other side. So,
I mean, yeah, it's difficult to sometimes to, on a street view, I suppose, from the angle that you're seeing it, it's sometimes slightly warped. I think it is a bit higher. But I can move down the street and look back. Sorry, it's very slow here. But this property was referred to as well in terms of its footprint. Is there anywhere that you want me to look in particular?
no, I'm happy with that. Councillor Thompson, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to check that initial property that we looked at, that was number 15, which I understand is classed as a 1.75 storey. Would that be correct?
There was one that was 1.75. Just let me double check what that was. Yes, that was the one. Yeah.
And can I just check? I think the application for that, would that be 2016, which would predate the 2017 local development plan?
Yes, it is. It is 2016. Yeah.
Would it be possible that? Did you finish, Councillor Thompson? Yeah. No, it's okay. I just don't want to miss anyone. Would it be possible to have a look at the north elevation of this, just to see just to have another look at that and see how that sort of looks
Of the proposal.
Of the proposal, yes.
Yeah. Just a second. To try and get that to go onto the. Can't drag it across. I'll have to reshare. You see that?
Yes, yes. That's very useful. With regards to amenity, I know we don't have anything that would give the indication of shadow or anything on the neighbouring properties to the east and west of that, but I just wondered if massing would be considered an impact on the residential amenity of the buildings to either side.
Yes, it can be. I mean, it's the presence of a building of the size proposed. I mean, it's difficult to say exactly what that impact would be without doing the, the daylighting study that we would normally do. I think the case officer said they didn't have information on the windows of the neighbouring properties, but there would be the presence of a building of that massing.
I just have one other question about the increase in the size. It's gone from the curtilages to what, from it's gone up to something like 44%. The recommended is from the Scottish government is 33%. So that's quite an increase in coverage of the curtilage.
Yes, it's the supplementary guidance that says the 1/3. Yeah, that's the guideline, and then you would look at the surrounding area to see in context whether that was how that fitted with the surrounding area. Yeah, so it's.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Is there any further questions? No. Moving on. As there are no further questions, in accordance with the procedure notes circulated in the local review body, we will now discuss and determine the manner in which the reviews to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. Councillor Bowes, could you please state your decision in respect to the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision, referring to planning policy where appropriate?
Thanks, convener. I'm minded to uphold the original decision by the officers. I do appreciate that there is another building which has been approved somewhere, but it was prior to the adoption of the 2017 local development plan. And looking on this application on its merits, I'm in agreement with the original report that this development does not comply with policies H1, E1, and in the not yet adopted new plan policy D2 amenity. So that would be my my thinking on this, convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes. Excuse me. Councillor Thompson, please state your decision in respect of the application and state for the minutes the grounds for that decision, referring to planning policy where appropriate.
Thank you, convener. And like Councillor Bowes, I would my decision is that I would uphold officers' recommendation to refuse. And my reasons being, yes, H1 residential areas, including the supplementary guidance about subdivision of curtilages, and also quality placemaking. And as Councillor Browse mentioned, certainly there are other houses in the area, but that they predate the 2017 local development plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I'm going to agree with both Councillor Bowes and Councillor Thompson and uphold the officer's recommendation for very similar reasons. Policy D1, quality placemaking, and H1, looking at the massing of the building as compared to the rest of the buildings on the street, and indeed even the new buildings, it is quite overpowering within the street. So I would consider it to be overdevelopment of the site. I also have concerns about the subdivision of the residential area, going from up to 40% of the curtilage. I do have slight concerns about the amenity in H1 for the properties to either side of that. I know we don't have a shadowing thing, but I think having a building of that size, that close to the buildings on either side, is quite overpowering. I think, bearing in mind that talking about the other buildings in the area, yes, they were given permission under the old local development plan, but looking at the images there, ridgeline seems to be much more in keeping with the remainder of the street. And although some of them are quite modern, I think effort has been made to keep them within the overall setting of the property. So I would say under H1 and D1, it's overdevelopment of the site. The local review body has therefore agreed to unanimously uphold the decision of the appointed officer, and the application is therefore refused. Please note that the decision from today's meeting will be issued to the applicant or the agent after the meeting. I believe that draws the meeting to an end, and I'd just like to thank everybody, including Ms. Green and Mr. Mason and Councillors Thompson and Councillor Bowes for their participation. I don't think we need to go into conditions because we're refusing it. So I'd like to thank you all and for your forbearance for my occasionally breaking into a cough, but that's not something I can control at the moment. So thank you for your attendance, and I call the meeting to an end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.